The Spanish-American War.
Content Overview, AMSCO Topic 7.3. Central Idea, the Spanish-American War and U.S. Foreign Policy to 1917. Learning Objective, explain and identify the causes and effects of the Spanish-American War. Review and understand the factors that led to the war, including social, political, and economic factors. Describe the conditions for the Philippines and Cuba following the end of the war. Explain the impact of the signing of the Treaty of Paris of 1898. Discuss the social, economic, and political impacts of the war. Understand the important figures and events of the war.
The Spanish-American War. The Spanish-American War was due to America's support of the Cubans and Filipinos against Spanish rule and the explosion of the battleship USS Maine in Havana Harbor. On April 25, 1898, the U.S. declared war on Spain after sinking of the battleship Maine in Havana Harbor on February 15, 1898. The war was ended with the signing of the Treaty of Paris on December 10, 1898. Under the Treaty of Paris, Cuba gained independence from Spain, and the U.S. gained possession of the Philippines, Puerto Rico, and Guam.
Leading up to the war. In the 1890s, previous to the start of the war, large numbers of investment into Cuban sugar led to a rise in interest to add Cuba as a territory of the United States. Interest in Cuba was also driven by Spanish misrule over Cuba, which the United States believed they were capable of getting rid of. The Monroe Doctrine, which stated that any attempt to colonize the Americas would be viewed as a direct attack on the United States, along with the sugar investments and the dislike of Spanish rule, gave the United States enough motive and incentive to intervene on the Spanish rule in Cuba.
Causes of the war. Jingoism. Intense nationalism leading up to and during the war. It called for aggressive foreign policies. Expansionists in the United States began pushing for the country to take its place as a world power next to the imperialist powers of Europe. Cuban Revolt. Attempt to overthrow the Spanish regime from 1868 to 1878. The revolt resurfaced in 1895 through sabotage and attacks on Cuban plantations. The Spanish sent General Valeriano Weyler and 100,000 troops to crush the revolts and send civilians into camps. Yellow Press, also known as yellow journalism, filled headlines with gore-related topics about Spanish rule in Cuba, over-exaggerating the actions of the Spanish in an attempt to gain American interest and provide an incentive for the participation/intervention of the United States. Delome letter written by a Spanish diplomat leaked into the American press, claimed that it insulted President McKinley, ultimately viewed as a direct insult from Spain to the United States.
The Maine sinking. The United States battleship USS Maine, harbored in Havana, Cuba, suddenly exploded on February 15, 1898, soon after the writing of the Delome letter. The explosion killed about 260 Americans. The Yellow Press accused Spain of causing the explosion, though further research proved it was likely an accident. McKinley's war message. Following the sinkage of the Maine, President McKinley issued an ultimatum to Spain, stating that they should agree to a ceasefire. Spain agreed. However, a majority in Congress insisted on war. President McKinley fell into the pressure and declared war on Spain. Teller Amendment claimed that following the end of the war, the United States had no intention of ruling over Cuba and it would become free to the Cuban people.
Here's the summarized timeline of events.
The war. The Philippines. Theodore Roosevelt, at that time Secretary of the Navy, ordered a fleet to the Philippines commanded under General George Dewey. May 1st, 1898. General Dewey fired on the Spanish at Manila Bay. This sent the Spanish into submission. Though fight on shore ended shortly, fight on land lasted until August 13th. U.S. troops took over the city of Manila.
Cuba. Over 5,000 soldiers died from diseases such as malaria, typhoid, while only about 500 died on the battlefield. Battle of San Juan Hill. A regiment of volunteers under Theodore Roosevelt, known as the Rough Riders, won against the Spanish through a cavalry charge. It was an important victory for the U.S. Battle of Santiago de Cuba. On July 3, 1898, U.S. Navy succeeds in defeating the Spanish at Santiago Bay. Spain realized that without a navy, they could not defeat the U.S. Eventually, they asked for the U.S.'s terms of peace.
Here are some primary sources of the Philippines and Cuba during the Spanish-American War.
Annexations and controversies. Hawaii. Following the outbreak of war in the Philippines, Congress allowed for President McKinley to see through the annexation of Hawaii in July of 1898. Hawaii officially became a territory in 1900 and went to become the 50th state in the United States in August of 1959.
The Philippine Question. Sharp divide between imperialists that supported the annexation of the Philippines and anti-imperialists that did not brought up the Philippine Question. Anti-imperialists claimed its annexation would deprive Filipino people the life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness rights written in the Declaration of Independence. Annexation would also set a direct link between the United States to the problems in Asia.
Treaty of Paris. Considered controversial seeing as it led to the acquisition of Cuba and the Philippines as American territories. The United States claimed they would free Cuba. However, following the acquisition of both countries, they were treated as colonies instead.
After the war, the Platt Amendment and Cuba. The amendment required Cuba to never sign a treaty with any foreign power that intervened with their attempt to gain independence. It also required Cuba to allow the United States to intervene with any Cuban affairs to preserve its independence. As well as that, the amendment required Cuba to allow the U.S. to maintain naval bases in Cuba.
Election of 1900. President McKinley renominated with Theodore Roosevelt as vice president. The Democrats nominated William Jennings Bryan. Jennings argued for free silver and was extremely anti-imperialist. Most people still supported the gold standard and new territories.
The United States rose as a global power and was recognized for its strong navy and activeness in foreign affairs.
Effects of the Spanish-American War. The United States emerged as a world power. Cuba gained independence from Spain. Hawaii was annexed by the U.S. The U.S. gained possession of the Philippines, Guam, and Puerto Rico.
Sources and credits.
Thank you for watching.